Someone asks you what you want to do for your birthday, and you pause. Not because you're thinking about it, but because you genuinely don't have an answer. You're not being modest. You're not fishing for them to plan something. You just don't feel much about it. Maybe you say, "I don't really care," and they look at you like that's a sad thing to admit. It might not be, but it also might not be as fine as it sounds. That's what this video is actually about, not whether you should care about your birthday, but what it means that you don't. Because there isn't one answer to that question, and anyone who tells you there is hasn't been paying close enough attention to how different people end up at the same surface, indifference for completely different reasons. What birthdays are actually doing. Before anything else, it helps to understand what birthdays are functioning as. Not what we're told they are, but what they're actually doing emotionally. Birthdays mark time, but more than that, they mark you inside time. They're a cultural mechanism for saying, this person exists, and their existence is worth acknowledging. Once a year, the social world is supposed to organize itself briefly around you. Friends remember, family calls, people who normally don't think to check in. For children, this is almost pure delight. The day is unambiguous. Cake, attention, gifts. It's a sanctioned moment of being celebrated, and children take that in without complication. But adults carry history, and history changes what a birthday means. The older you get, the more a birthday becomes a kind of emotional audit. You feel how old you are, you notice who remembered and who didn't. You compare the day to expectations you didn't even know you had until they went unmet. You think about what you've built or haven't. You think about the people who used to be there and aren't anymore. For some people, that audit goes fine. The day is warm and they feel loved and they don't overthink it. But for a lot of people, the audit starts to cost more than it gives. And at some point, the simplest thing is to stop holding the audit at all, when disappointment becomes the pattern. There's a particular kind of birthday indifference that doesn't come from peace. It comes from accumulated disappointment that was never fully processed, just quietly absorbed year after year until the feelings stopped arriving at all. Think about someone, call her Diane, who spent most of her 20s hoping that birthdays would feel the way they were supposed to feel. She'd drop hints, plan things, try to keep expectations low while secretly keeping them high. Some years were okay. A lot of years were underwhelming. A few were genuinely painful. The canceled plan, the forgotten call, the birthday that came and went while everyone around her was busy with their own lives. By her mid-30s, Diane would tell you she doesn't care about her birthday anymore, and on the surface, that's true. She doesn't plan anything. She doesn't mention it's coming. She feels almost nothing on the day itself. But if you watched her carefully on that day, if you notice the way she checks her phone in the morning, the slight flatness she carries when no one at work mentions it, the specific kind of quiet she goes into by evening, you'd see that the indifference isn't complete. It's a lid on something that still has pressure underneath. This is one of the most common forms of birthday detachment, and it's worth naming clearly. Sometimes people stop caring because caring started to feel dangerous. Because every year they let themselves feel something about the day, they risked being disappointed again. And at some point, the emotional math shifted. It became less painful to feel nothing than to feel something and have it land badly. This isn't pathology. It's a reasonable response to a repeated experience. But it is worth recognizing because the numbness it creates doesn't stay contained to birthdays. It tends to spread. People who've learned to protect themselves from disappointment in one place often find they've quietly learned to expect less everywhere. When identity quietly shifts, there's a different kind of birthday indifference, quieter, less painful, that happens when a person's sense of self simply stops needing external confirmation. When you're younger, social rituals carry a lot of identity weight. Being celebrated means something. People knowing it's your birthday, making a fuss, gathering around you. All of that feeds a part of you that's still figuring out whether it matters, whether it belongs, whether it's loved. As some people mature, that hunger settles. Not because they've become cold or disconnected, but because they've developed a more stable internal sense of who they are. They don't need the ritual to feel real. They don't need the social confirmation to know they're valued. For these people, a Birthday is just a day, not a bad day, not something to be avoided, just a Tuesday that happens to have a number attached to it. You'll notice these people aren't bitter about birthdays. They're not secretly wounded. They're genuinely fine, often more than fine. They might spend the day doing something they love without telling anyone. They might have a quiet dinner. They might work. And at the end of the day, they don't feel like they missed anything. This kind of indifference looks the same from the outside as Diane's, but it comes from a completely different place. One is a wall, the other is just a cleared field, space that used to be occupied by something that was needed and isn't needed anymore. When life gets too full for ritual, there's another version of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it has less to do with emotional history and more to do with mental load. Think about someone in their 40s, call him Marcus, who runs a small business, has 2 kids, and is managing an aging parent's decline while trying to keep his marriage alive. He is not, in any dramatic sense, an unhappy person, but his inner life is permanently crowded. There is always something pressing. There is always a problem he's halfway through solving. When Marcus's birthday comes, he notices it the way he notices a lot of things. Briefly, then he moves on. He's not avoiding it. He's not protecting himself from disappointment. He's just fully occupied. The bandwidth that birthdays require, the self-reflection, the sentiment, the pausing to feel something about the passage of time, he doesn't have it right now. He hasn't had it in years. What Marcus experiences isn't emotional numbness. It's more like emotional compression. He feels things, but rarely in the spaces that rituals are designed to occupy. He feels things at 11 p.m. when the house is quiet. He feels them in the car. He feels them reading something unexpectedly sharp. His birthday passes without weight, not because he's shut down, but because the weight he carries is already at capacity. This matters to name because it can be mistaken by the person themselves and by people who love them for depression or indifference. But it's often neither. It's what happens when a person has been running hard for a long time and the softer registers of experience have had to wait their turn. The difference between freedom and numbness. This is where it gets genuinely difficult to be honest with yourself. Freedom and numbness can feel almost identical from the inside. Both feel like not being bothered. Both feel like a kind of lightness. Both feel, in the moment, like you're fine, but they're different in ways that matter. Emotional freedom is expansive. If you're genuinely free about your birthday, if you've outgrown the need for it to be significant without having suppressed anything, you can talk about that freely. You can hear that someone else loves their birthday and feel warm about it. You can remember a birthday from years ago that was good and feel the warmth of that without clinging to it. You can sit with the fact that you're another year older and feel something quiet and real about that, even if it isn't dramatic. Numbness is contractile. It protects by narrowing. If your birthday indifference comes from a defended place, there's often a slight edge around the subject, a quick subject change, a kind of practice flatness when birthdays come up. Sometimes an overemphasis on how little you care, which is its own tell. The honest question, and this is worth sitting with rather than answering immediately, is whether your relationship to your birthday has any charge in it. Not whether you want a party or not. Not whether you think birthdays are important, but whether there's any residual electricity there, any small thing that tightens, however slightly, when the day approaches or passes. If there is, it's worth being curious about, not alarmed, not self-critical, just curious. And if there genuinely isn't, if the day passes with the easy neutrality of any other day, that's also worth noticing, and not assuming it requires an explanation, what gets lost and what doesn't. Here's something true. When people stop caring about their birthdays, they often lose something alongside the pain. Birthdays, when they work, do something useful. They interrupt ordinary time. They create a small forced pause where a person is invited to consider. A year has passed. I am still here. What has that year meant? That kind of reflection doesn't require a party. It doesn't require anyone to acknowledge it, but it does require some willingness to mark the moment, to let the occasion of of another year passing land, even slightly. People who've completely insulated themselves from their birthday often find they've also insulated themselves from that particular form of self-reckoning. And while the self-reckoning can happen other ways in other moments, some people find that it quietly stops happening at all. Not dramatically, not noticeably, just years start to blur. Time feels less distinct. There's a faint sense of moving through the calendar without ever quite being stopped by it. This isn't a catastrophe, but it is a kind of drift, and drift can accumulate. No correct relationship to your birthday. There's no ideal way to relate to your birthday. That's not a disclaimer. It's actually the point. Some people will celebrate with full genuine joy, and that will be exactly right for them. Some will spend the day alone and feel complete. Some will forget entirely and feel nothing about having forgotten. Some will feel a complicated tangle of things and find that complicated tangle difficult to explain even to themselves. All of that is human. None of it requires correction, but there is something worth asking, not as a challenge, just as a quiet, honest question. When you say you don't care about your birthday, what's underneath that? Is it the easy contentment of someone who knows themselves well enough not to need the day to deliver anything? Is it the weariness of someone who's been caring too much for too long? Is it the quiet grief of someone who stopped expecting because expecting became too costly? Is it the straightforward neutrality of someone whose attention is simply elsewhere? The answer matters, not because it changes what you do on your birthday, but because it tells you something about where you actually are. And where you actually are is usually more worth knowing than whether you have plans. People who understand themselves, genuinely, not just as a concept, tend to move through their lives with more intention. Not more happiness, necessarily, not more ease, just more of a sense that they know what's happening in there, and why, and what it might mean. That kind of self-knowledge doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like an achievement. It mostly just feels like being a little more awake than you were before. And if your birthday becomes one of the small annual moments where that kind of waking up is possible, even if briefly, even if quietly, even if nothing about the day changes, that seems like enough. You don't have to celebrate anything, but you might find it's worth knowing yourself a little better.